So Attorney General Pam Bondi just got asked a straightforward constitutional question by Representative Jamie Raskin. Does it violate the Constitution for a sitting president to sue the federal government he controls and then settle those lawsuits with officials who work for him? And instead of answering, she called him obsessed, accused him of Trump derangement syndrome, went on a bizarre tangent about a criminal case in his district, and completely melted down on national television. But here's what makes this actually terrifying. She's not just deflecting. She's demonstrating in real time that she either doesn't understand or doesn't care about the constitutional boundaries of her own office. This wasn't a partisan gotcha moment. This was a member of Congress asking the nation's top law enforcement officer whether the president can legally pay himself billions of dollars from the Treasury using subordinates he can fire. And she refused to answer, not because the answer is complicated, but because the answer is obvious and saying it out loud would be politically inconvenient. Let's watch what happened. And then I'll break down exactly why this matters, what the law actually says, and what it means when the Attorney General of the United States doesn't know or won't follow the rules of a congressional hearing.
Do you even know who Chase Mulligan is? You're so obsessed with, you don't, do you?
I'm going to teach you the rules again. You're the Attorney General of the United States. We have rules here.
You're obsessed with him.
You're the Attorney General of the United States.
You're obsessed with Donald Trump. You have Trump derangement syndrome.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like my time
Mulligan
restored. I'd like my time restored.
In your district. In your district. And you don't even know about it, about keeping children safe from online predators.
Time belongs to the gentleman from Maryland. The gentleman can proceed.
Yeah, and I want the whole country to look at this. Because this is the Attorney General of the United States, whose job is law enforcement. We've never had a witness who has misunderstood our rules and been unable to conform his or her conduct to our rules before. I want to start by saying I appreciate what you said, Attorney General Bondi, and you said it to me personally, that you take the personal security of every member of Congress seriously and that people can contact you about that. And in these times, that's a very serious matter. So I thank you for that. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7 of the Constitution is the Domestic Emoluments Clause. And it says that the president is limited to his salary in office and cannot receive any other money from the federal government while he's in office. It cannot be increased by $1. This president is the first president in U.S. history who has repeatedly sued the federal government for $230 million for the judicial search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, which was perfectly lawful and was never struck down. But now he's suing the IRS for $10 billion. He's suing the IRS for $10 billion, which I think is around 80% of its annual budget, because his tax returns were leaked. And they were illegally leaked by a private contractor who actually is in prison now, Charles Littlejohn. But he wants $10 billion. Now, well, I want to ask you the question of whether you think it would violate the Domestic Emoluments Clause for you to settle that $10 billion case or any of the other claims that the president has made against the government. He himself has remarked, it's interesting because I'm the one that makes the deal, right? And he says, I kind of have to work it out with myself. Do you think it would violate the Domestic Emoluments Clause for the president to work out a deal from people who are his subordinates under his unitary executive theory to get money in one of these cases?
I'm not going to discuss pending litigation.
Okay, so theoretically you're saying because his privacy rights were violated in that tax case, and they were. I'm with the president on that. I mean, his Mar-a-Lago thing is ridiculous, but there's no doubt that his tax returns, despite the fact that he promised to release them, despite the fact that every other president released the tax returns, he suffered embarrassment when it showed that he hadn't paid taxes for several years, and he had a right for that not to happen. Now, I want to turn back to the Epstein survivors, because President Trump may have been a little bit embarrassed by the release of those tax returns. How much do you think the claims of these survivors are worth? As the good congressman from Kentucky just pointed out, there were lots of survivors who had decided, for reasons of their own, never to release their names. That determination was represented to people in Congress, and we built it into our federal law that their names could not be released, and yet you published their names, their phone numbers, their addresses, personally identifying information. If Donald Trump can get $10 billion theoretically from the Department of Justice, how much should these people get for a far worse violation of their privacy rights and a far greater danger established to them in their lives?
Do you even know who Chase Mulligan is? You're so obsessed with, you don't, do you?
I'm going to teach you the rules again. You're the Attorney General of the United States. We have rules here.
You're obsessed with him.
You're the Attorney General of the United States.
With obsessed with Donald Trump. You have Trump derangement syndrome.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like my time
Mulligan will be
restored. I'd like my time restored.
In your district. In your district, and you don't even know about it, about keeping children safe from online predators.
Time belongs to the gentleman from Maryland. The gentleman can proceed.
Yeah, and I want the whole country to look at this. Because this is the Attorney General of the United States, whose job is law enforcement. We've never had a witness who has misunderstood our rules and been unable to conform his or her conduct to our rules before. We have only 5 minutes, and so we use our time to ask you specific questions.
How long are you giving me to answer?
Excuse me, I'm not yielding to you right now. I'd like that second restored too. So, Ms. Bondi, the way it works is we ask you a question, and you answer it, and if you go off on a wild goose chase, another tangent, you start reading statistics, or you start talking about stuff going on in our district. And by the way, I invite you to my district. Come to my district, but that's not what we're here to do today, okay? So, and you do that, then we're allowed to say we reclaim our time. At that point, you have to be quiet. You have no choice. You have to be quiet. So I hope you understand the rule at this point. Now, here's what I want to ask you. You're in law enforcement. We've seen all kinds of evidence of crimes. And when we go over to the Department of Justice for the 4 computers for every member of Congress, we see more evidence of crimes. Will you create a joint task force of the Department of Justice and governors and state attorney generals and district attorneys across the country to investigate the crimes that have taken place against these victims and more than 1,000 like them? The DOJ is not doing its job. Will you create a task force with state and local law enforcement to make that happen?
Gentlelady can respond if she wants to.
Thank you, Chairman. He called Chase Mulligan a wild goose chase and didn't even know who he was. He is a defendant in your own district who preyed on girls.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, you know what? If he were part of the Epstein investigation, you wouldn't do anything about it.
Online chat rooms and committed sextortion. Yet he didn't even know in your tiny little district who he was.
Mr. Chairman, she's embarrassing you.
He's about to be
This is your committee, and she is embarrassing you.
Shame on you.
Okay, let me walk you through what just happened step by step, because this is genuinely one of the most disturbing exchanges I've seen in a congressional hearing, and not for the reasons you might think. First, let's talk about the constitutional question Raskin asked, because it's not theoretical. It's happening right now. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7 of the Constitution is called the Domestic Emoluments Clause. Here's the exact text. The president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. Translation, the president gets a salary. That's it. No bonuses, no side deals, no payments from the federal government beyond that fixed compensation. The founders wrote this specifically to prevent a president from using the power of the office to enrich himself at taxpayer expense. Now, Donald Trump is suing the federal government for over $10 billion, or that's not a typo, $10 billion. The lawsuit claims damages for the leak of his tax returns by a private contractor named Charles Littlejohn, who is currently serving a 5-year federal prison sentence for that leak. Trump is also suing for $230 million over the FBI's lawful search warrant executed at Mar-a-Lago. Here's the problem. Trump is suing agencies that he controls. The IRS reports to the Treasury Department. The Treasury Secretary works for Trump. The Attorney General Pam Bondi works for Trump. If there's a settlement or judgment, it would be paid from the Treasury Judgment Fund, which is overseen by officials Trump appointed and can fire. So when Raskin asks, does it violate the Domestic Emoluments Clause for you to settle a case that would pay your boss billions of dollars? That's not a gotcha question. That's a fundamental constitutional inquiry. And Bondi's response? I'm not going to discuss pending litigation. That's not an answer. That's an evasion. Because the question isn't about the merits of the case. It's about whether the mechanism itself violates the Constitution. And if she genuinely believes it doesn't, and she should be able to say why, but she can't, because if she says no, it doesn't violate the clause, she's essentially arguing that a president can sue the government, oversee the defense, and collect the payout. And if she says yes, it does violate the clause, she's admitting that her boss is pursuing an unconstitutional financial scheme. So instead, she goes on the attack. And that's where this gets truly unhinged. Bondi starts talking about Chase Mulligan, a criminal defendant in Raskin's district who was charged with crimes against minors. She accuses Raskin of not knowing who he is, implies that Raskin doesn't care about predators, and then repeatedly interrupts him, violating the basic rules of congressional testimony. Let me be very clear about what happened there. The Attorney General of the United States, the nation's top law enforcement officer, was asked a direct constitutional question and responded by deflecting to a local criminal case that has absolutely nothing to do with the hearing. That's not defending the Constitution. That's a Fox News segment disguised as testimony. And when Raskin tries to reclaim his time, which is standard congressional procedure, Bondi keeps talking. She accuses him of having Trump derangement syndrome. She mocks his district. She refuses to stop talking when directed to do so by the member asking the question. This isn't normal. Cabinet officials don't behave this way. Even hostile witnesses from previous administrations understood that when a member of Congress says, "I reclaim my time," you stop talking. That's not a suggestion. That's the rule. Raskin has to literally explain the rules of the hearing to the Attorney General like she's a first-time witness who doesn't understand how Congress works. We ask you a question, you answer it. If you go off on a tangent, we reclaim our time. At that point, you have to be quiet. The fact that he had to say that to the Attorney General of the United States is stunning. Now, let's talk about the second part of Raskin's question, because this is where the moral contrast becomes stark. Trump claims he suffered reputational harm when his tax returns were leaked. And yes, that leak was illegal. Charles Littlejohn is in prison for it. But Trump is seeking $10 billion in damages. For comparison, that's roughly 80% of the IRS's annual budget. Meanwhile, according to reporting from multiple outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and attorney Brad Edwards, who represents Epstein survivors, the DOJ's January 2025 release of Epstein files included the names, phone numbers, and addresses of dozens of survivors who were minors when they were abused. These were people who had been promised by federal law that their identities would be protected, and the DOJ published their information anyway. So Raskin's question is simple. If Trump can get $10 billion for the embarrassment of having his tax returns leaked, how much should survivors get for having their names, addresses, and personal details exposed, putting them at risk of harassment, retaliation, or worse? Bondi doesn't answer. Instead, she pivots back to Chase Mulligan. This is the tell. When asked to compare Trump's financial claim to the privacy violations suffered by sex trafficking survivors, Bondi changes the subject entirely because the answer is obvious and it's politically untenable. So what does this mean for you? It means that the person in charge of enforcing federal law doesn't believe she has to follow the rules when testifying to Congress. If the Attorney General can interrupt, deflect, and refuse to answer constitutional questions, what message does that send to every U.S. attorney, every FBI agent, every prosecutor in the country? It means that oversight, the mechanism that's supposed to keep executive power in check, is being treated as optional. And when oversight becomes optional, accountability disappears. And it means that if you're a survivor of abuse whose information was illegally released by the DOJ, you don't get $10 billion. You don't even get an apology. You get the Attorney General pivoting to a totally unrelated case and accusing the person asking questions of not caring about children. Here's the bottom line. Raskin asked whether it's constitutional for a president to pay himself billions of dollars using subordinates he controls. Bondi refused to answer and then had a meltdown on national television. That's not defending the rule of law. That's defending one person above the law. And when the Attorney General does that, the entire system breaks. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening, hit that like button. Subscribe for more analysis that cuts through the noise. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.